Good morning. God bless you. This is Jeremiah Johnson with Good News in the Morning, and I just want to say hello to you. I hope that you're having a great morning. I hope that you're having a great day. And if this is when you're listening to it, of course, you don't have to listen to this in the morning. You can get our app. jjm.life is our website. And then if you search our app on the Google Store or Apple Store, just type in Jeremiah Johnson Ministries. And we have these podcasts in the podcast form anytime you want to listen to them. And, it's just so important to hear the message of the good news and to hear it regularly. It tunes you in to the reality of the heart of God, the success of the cross, and it just helps you to see things clearly. The Bible talks about repeatedly that the just shall live by faith. It's everywhere in the scriptures, and it's huge, man. The just shall live by faith. And so, I love the Wuest translation of this. And, if you guys want an awesome study tool, Kenneth Wuest was just an amazing Greek scholar, and he translates New Testament, and he doesn't try to water down the verbiage when he's in the translation. So he says whatever he needs to say, as many words as he needs to use in order to convey what's being said there in the Greek. And so it's really a great tool. It's similar to the Amplified. Amplified does something similar, but the Wuest is wonderful. But anyway, it says that the just by faith shall live and shall live by faith. The just by faith shall live and shall live by faith. And I think the Amplified says that as well, because it's just a better translation of the nuances of the Greek language. And so the just by faith shall live and shall live by faith. So what does that mean? Those that are right with God by faith. God has always wanted to deal with man according to faith, according to trust in Him. Not trust in self, but trust in Him. And when your trust is in what He has done, not what you have done. God understands that when we are confident in His goodness, and when we are confident in His nature, and we are confident that He's good and He cares about us and He's going to follow through with what He says, that pleases God. The Bible talks about where faith pleases God, and if we're honest with ourselves, faith pleases everybody. What are you talking about, Jeremiah? Well, maybe let me break it down into a more relatable thing. Don't you like it when people trust you? Don't you like it when people trust in your goodness? Like if you tell somebody you're going to do something and they trust you because they believe you, right? Now, obviously, that trust many times is going to be reflective of your track record. If you have a good track record, then, they're going to trust you. But it feels good to be trusted. It does not feel good to not be trusted. Be around someone who's always questioning your motives or not thinking that you're going to follow through or whatever. Well, it's actually a slight against your character, right? And so with God, God likes it when we trust Him. God likes it when we trust and when we believe that He's good and He's really going to do what He says He's going to do. And so God's heart has always been to function in faith. We see that with Enoch. Enoch walked with God. He's in that Hebrews chapter 11 chapter that talks about, the hall of fame, faith, so to speak. And he walked with God and was not, because he pleased the Lord. He trusted God. And we see that with Abraham. Abraham believed God. He trusted in the goodness of God. We see that with Caleb and Joshua, that, they believed that God was going to take them into the promised land, on and on and on. The list goes on and on. All these people, they trusted in God and they believed in God. Now, the inversion of that is where we begin to trust in self. And our conduct and what we can do and what we bring to the table. And then we begin to enter into more of a transactional type of agreement with God. And that is not as pleasing to Him. And I'll give you an example of when this happened. There, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, initially when they came out, they were functioning in that covenant that Abraham enjoyed, which was a covenant of faith. Righteousness was imputed to Abraham. He was functioning in faith, right? And then, when they come out, they were functioning in that. But then at some point, if you look at it in the Hebrew language, they're like, you know what, God, whatever you tell us to do, we can do it. We've got this. Just tell us what to do and we'll do it. And then what happened, and this happened at Mount Sinai, there was a transition from a faith-based covenant with Abraham. And then at Mount Sinai, they're like, look, just give us some rules to follow. Tell us what to do. And at that moment, the whole tone changed. When they came out of Egypt and when they complained, God, said, hey, we need water. God gave them water. Hey, we need meat. God gave them meat. And they were, they were messing up left, right, and sideways, but, nobody was dying. There was no sense of judgment. Everything was fine. But at Mount Sinai, there was a transition. And they were like, hey, look, just give us some rules to follow. We got this and we're going to do this. And so what happened at that point, it transitioned from a faith-based covenant, trusting in the goodness of God. And it began and what it did was it placed the blessing in more in the hands of man, to where man was like, okay, if I keep this, you bless me. If I do this, you bless me. And so, we know what happened. That transition was not good, because they no longer wanted to trust in God's goodness. They wanted to trust in their own goodness. And so Moses went up, got the big 10 commandments, came down, they were immediately losing their minds and had made a golden calf and, functioning in all forms of immorality. And, Moses, of course, loses his temper, gets mad, breaks the commandments, and then 3,000 people die. And so now, from then on, there was a shift in the way that God related to them, because they were no longer functioning in faith towards God. They were actually trying to establish their own goodness so that God would owe them based upon their ability to keep the law. And so the dynamic had changed. And so, and it changed within their heart. Not necessarily, like, the commandments themselves are good. Like, everything in the 10 commandments is wonderful. It's good. We want that, man. We want to function in that, because the reality is that's really, in a practical sense, what it looks like to walk in love, right? When we're walking in love, we're keeping all those commandments, right? But if in our hearts we're trying to keep them in order to get God to do something for us, rather than by faith trusting in his goodness and then walking in his ways, there's a difference. And it's the difference between life and death. And maybe I can lay it out to you like this and make it just a little bit more plain, because these are some challenging concepts to convey in 14 minutes, but I feel led down this road. And, it would be like this, say Christmas morning, your kids, there it is, it's Christmas time, and, got gifts under the tree. And, it should be a time of, like, celebration and excitement and gratitude and all these types of things. But if, let's say, before Christmas, the kids come and they say, hey, look, Dad or Mom, I'm going to be so good this year that every gift under that tree, you're going to owe it to me, because I'm going to be so good that you're going to owe me these gifts because I'm that awesome. And so what happens is the child leaves this dynamic of faith and grace and receiving and being thankful, and enters into this works dynamic of transactional obedience, where now it's no longer a gift. Now it becomes a paycheck that's owed to them. And so God doesn't, he doesn't want us thinking that we can somehow bring him in debt to us so that he owes us the promises, so that he owes us his blessings, so that he owes us his goodness. That's not a faith-based covenant. That's actually a self-righteous covenant. Legalism, externalism, moralism, all these things I talk about pretty regularly, at its core, it means this: I'm going to be so good that I'm going to control God. God will be forced to be good to me. And so I hope you're getting this, and I hope you're understanding this, and I hope you're not misunderstanding what I'm trying to say here. But that mindset is dangerous. And another way to make it very clear is, the 11th hour worker and the first hour worker. The first hour worker is working, the parable, the guy goes out and hires servants, hires first hour guy. And, he says, hey, agree with me for 1 denarius a day. And then, he continues to hire till he gets to the 11th hour worker. And to the 11th hour worker, he says this: I'll give you what's right. Okay. And so then it's time for everybody to get paid. He pays the 11th hour worker first. He gives him a full denarius, only worked an hour. And then the first hour worker, he gives him a denarius, even though he worked all day. First hour worker, mad, upset, grumbling, complaining. He's like, look, did we not agree? We agreed for, one denarius, one full day's wage. And they're like, why'd you give the 11th hour guy that only worked 1 hour? Why'd you give him a full day's wage? And he said, is your eye evil because I'm good? And what he was saying is, like, if I want to be good, I'm going to be good. And you have no control over my goodness or my blessing or my supply. And so, and as humans, we're always wanting to kind of micromanage God's goodness and determine who gets it and who doesn't get it. And that's not really something that we have the right over. But now that I've, kind of laid out this parable really quickly, let me explain these concepts real quick. But so the first hour worker is trusting in a contractual agreement. Like, I will do this and you give me this, right? And then the 11th hour worker is like, look, I'm just going to trust in your goodness, and I'm going to trust in you, and you'll pay me what's right. And so the 11th hour worker, the guy who does the least amount of work, his focus is on the goodness of the master. The first hour worker, his focus is on his own goodness. And so in our walk with God, in our lives, you can have two different mindsets. You can be it doesn't matter how long you've been in the field. The time is irrelevant. It's the attitude of the heart. You can approach God with this contractual, well, God, I go to church. Well, God, I'm a giver. Well, God, I do this. I don't do what sister so-and-so does down the street, or I don't do what brother so-and-so does. Well, I do this and I do that. And God, you should answer my prayers. I'm telling you, if you approach God like that, there's no faith in what you're doing, because you are, in a contractual sense, trying to make God owe you based upon what you do. That's dangerous, because God owes you nothing, and he will never owe you anything, but he will give you everything for free through the Lord Jesus Christ. You want to come by faith in his goodness and not trying to establish your own goodness. And it's a huge thing, man, because in our minds, a lot of times we think that we can earn things from God, and it's a very dangerous road to go down. You don't earn anything from God. God wants a faith-based relationship with you. He doesn't want a contractual agreement. He wants to give you the Christmas gifts under the tree because he loves you, not because you did everything right. And, and tying back into that, analogy with children in Christmas, the kids that are just receiving the gifts and they're thankful and they're enjoying the goodness of their parents, that the parents are having fun. They feel good about giving to the kids. The kids are having fun. Everybody's in a state of gratitude, right? But then if you shift that and you go back to, well, you're going to owe me every single gift that's under a tree. No one's having fun. There's no love that's being expressed. There's no joy. There's no gratitude. This is a contractual, transactional agreement of I earned it and you owe it to me. You never want to have that type of relationship with God. You want to stay in a relationship of faith and trusting in his goodness. And I'm telling you, God will overwhelm you and overshadow you with his goodness, but you always got to come in faith in him and not in yourself.